My name is Sean Wilson, and I head up the account team here at CrossViews in regards to the North American team. I'm excited. I'm excited for today's content. I'm lucky to have my co-presenters with me today. So Andrea Castillo. Andrea is our practice director here at CrossViews. She heads up the practice for risk and security. And then I'm also lucky to have Claudius Malinowski. Claudius is a solution sales manager. He's responsible for all security operation related items on the ServiceNow platform. And his scope of influence is nationally across Canada. We've been working together and anticipating and looking forward to today's session. We've got some exciting content to share with you. Few housekeeping items before we get started. We often get the request or question about a link or sharing the deck. We'll do exactly that. Anybody who's registered for this will get a link to the recording. So you'll see all the content after the fact and can share it. In regards to questions, we don't have a specific time slot carved out of today's content for questions, but we'd love to answer them. So my ask is either reach out to us individually or even put your questions in the chat area. We'll capture them and we'll reach out individually after today's content. So now that that's out of the way, we can go ahead and get started. When we think about the point of today, it's really around sharing some experience that all of our teams have learned in solving a problem for our customers, right? The question is, how are these security folks dealing with the volume of work really that's coming at them now? Specifically, how are they dealing with that work and operationalizing that, leveraging ServiceNow? So that's the problem statement for today. Hopefully at the end, you'll agree we've more than covered that. All right, so I want to get started, but I really want to understand the problem, right? They gave me that line that I just read to you, but I feel like we've got to know some more context, right? Because security has been dealing with these kinds of breaches, I think, all along. So what's happened? What's changed? How big is this problem? And really, what is the scope of it? And for that, I want to lean on the expert here at CrossViews, which is Andrea. So Andrea, could you talk a little bit about the size and scope of what we're talking about today?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. And definitely security has been dealing with these challenges even before, I guess IT has been dealing with these challenges even before we really had formal security teams. So there's been issues as long as IT's been there, but I think I'm going to have to bring up the dreaded COVID pandemic to sort of start us out today, with apologies to everyone. I'm sure we have some fatigue around that topic, but we really have an overnight transition of folks working from home, as well as people doing more work and leisure activities online. So huge increase in that. Businesses have been increasing their digital business activities at really a blazing, unprecedented speed. I've heard and read a little bit that some experts are saying, hey, we've moved ahead 10 years in some cases in 1 year. And that obviously increases risk, and the bad actors are well aware of that fact. And so they really are increasing the number of attacks. So you're seeing more kind of in the media, you're seeing more reports, larger cyber, laws, cyber attacks, data breaches, ransomware attacks, and the FBI confirms that that's the case. It's not just a perception issue. There's been a 400% increase in reported attacks since the start of the COVID pandemic.
Wow.
The attackers want data. They want to either sell the data that they access and the information, or they want organizations to pay them not to release it, which would be a ransomware attack. They've succeeded on an unprecedented scale in 2020. There was 36 billion records that were exposed, according to CISO magazine. And on average, data breaches are taking a long time to detect. It's 197 days. And dealing with the fallout is costing on average $3.8 million for each data breach event. Ransomware attacks estimated at 20 billion in 2020 and only growing. And just an interesting little tidbit is that the industry that kind of saw the fastest rise in the cyber attacks is the healthcare industry, which sort of makes sense considering that their data is highly desirable at the moment with all of the sort of vaccines and all the IP that's being developed in healthcare at the moment. So they're experiencing a particularly unprecedented rise in attacks during the pandemic.
Wow. So at the risk of me exposing myself here of not knowing as much maybe as I should, here's what I think I heard. I heard you say that we've always been dealing with this, but the pandemic is, I think you said, somebody was quoted, kind of acted as a multiplier, 10x you quoted, right?
400 times more attack, a
400.
percent increase according to the FBI of reported attacks. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, when I think about my time in the last 6 years working with customers to really get to solve problems leveraging ServiceNow, I think about how I've worked with security departments, and I know that there's really been a focus on the next new security suite, the next new security tool, right? And it feels to me like in this case, based on what you're saying, is that solving this problem is more around hygiene and operationalizing and dealing maybe in a different way, right? It's less about a specialized tool that's going to solve this problem. It's more about dealing with a massive volume. Is that fair?
That's definitely fair, Sean. So I think the shared volume of tools in some cases is almost an over reliance on technology, and
Wow.
sometimes at the expense of people and process, which always need to be part of the equation. So that's really what we'll be focusing on quite a bit today. So to just kind of give you some insight more into what you said is, yeah, Gartner is saying that small organizations on average have about 15 to 20 security tools, medium size 50 to 60, and large enterprises have over 130 tools. So there's a lot of tools generating a whole bunch of data. And I think that what that's sort of creating in some cases is the average security operations center or SOC. They're getting a lot of data. They're looking at a lot of different systems, and they're kind of struggling with how to deal with that volume of data. And once they kind of even ingest the data, they analyze it, they know what needs to be done to respond and improve their security posture, then they're struggling how to bring IT teams into the picture to get them part of the solution to some of these challenges. So that's really a very true statement what you said, is that just bringing in another point solution is not necessarily going to fix this issue.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't think. I mean, honestly, when I think about, again, my experience working with customers across the years, one of the areas that ServiceNow and Crossviews has really helped with, I think, is bringing structure, kind of getting our arms around the problem. Now, not that that always solves every problem, but providing visibility and understanding and being able to define what the work is often a first step. And what I hear from you is that's kind of the first step we're going to talk about today, right? Excellent. So when I think about, if I was to break it down from this larger problem you talked about 400 times due to the pandemic, down to actionable steps, it sounds like we're talking about how do we provide this work in a way to our colleagues in the IT department to make that work more manageable, prioritize it, help them quickly action this stuff that should be. And then I think about in some cases it's not about proactive, like protecting us against a vulnerability, but it might be remediating something that's already happened. So let's start there. Let's start with the vulnerability piece. So if we think about vulnerability response, how do we protect ourselves? Can I guess help me understand what that is and what's happening now and why this is such a urgent issue.
Sure. So, yeah, I don't want to preach to the choir, but I think we might have some audiences of our audiences more IT focused, some of them maybe more security. So let's just kind of set the stage first for what vulnerability really is. So we've got something called a National Vulnerability Database, also known as NVD, that's collecting information about known vulnerabilities that are out there. It can be operating systems or software, and they can be exploited by malware, ransomware, et cetera, phishing, as we talked about earlier. So typical organizations have multiple thousands of vulnerabilities in their environment. And I think what's really important to note is they're not all created equal. So if there's a vulnerability that's against with a known exploit and it's against the operating system of a server that has personal identifiable information about your customers, that's an absolutely critical vulnerability. Today, I think in a lot of organizations, all vulnerabilities are being treated as equal. There's no way to prioritize and kind of do that kind of work. So interestingly, when I looked at a study of the 100 largest cyber loss events in the past couple of years, 50% of them were due to known vulnerabilities that should have been remediated or devices that weren't configured properly. So that's a huge number of cyber loss events attributed to kind of this problem. It's like leaving an open door into your infrastructure, and we already know how to close the door. So let's get it closed. So to outsmart kind of those bad actors, we need kind of a risk-based vulnerability approach. So we need to kind of get rid of scanning our environment, creating spreadsheets, sending them over to IT and saying, hey guys, fix these vulnerabilities. It's not sustainable the way we're doing it in a lot of cases today. So that's kind of where we're going to talk a little bit about getting the scanner and your technological solutions and getting that data sort of structured properly, bringing it into ServiceNow as a platform, grouping the vulnerabilities, applying risk-based prioritization, auto-assigning to the relevant group, and all of the kind of bringing structure to that work and bringing the risk-based vulnerability program into organizations. So I'm going to turn it over to Claudius, who's kind of going to talk about the journey and typically, how customers are deploying vulnerability response to solve their vulnerability management challenges. So Claudius?
Excellent. Thank you, Andrea and Sean. First of all, it's an honor to be here. I appreciate the opportunity. To the points you heard earlier that Sean and Andrea was saying, there's a big problem out there and it's only getting worse. So let's kind of frame up the problem statement and understand, how do we even get here? How did this even happen? When we see this massive spike, what are those things that are the challenges we really should frame and make sure we understand so we can start to solve those problems? So let me start there. As we look at the actual problem statement, I'm going to break it down to this image that you're seeing here in front of you. So we've got our security team on the left, and the security team, their roles and responsibilities are to protect and defend the base, right? We're trying to protect our company by also understanding what threats and exposures and vulnerabilities exist in my environment. And on the right-hand side, we've got IT operations. They're focused on keeping the lights on, the day-to-day activities, making sure things are up and running in a healthy state, and that we're not seeing disruption of our services that are going to impact our organization as well. Now, back to security for a moment. What are some of the challenges they're seeing? Well, number one, they've got, what I'm saying, too many alerts, a tremendous amount of vulnerabilities and alerts, right? We've got customers with thousands, hundreds of thousands, and some of our largest customers, millions or even tens of millions of vulnerabilities that they're dealing with. That's not to mention the ongoing, this is a perpetual problem, right? The ongoing net new vulnerabilities that are being discovered. The problem only gets bigger, the backlog only gets bigger. So just a sheer volume of alerts is a problem. But then on top of that, the lack of business context is really hard to say, well, how do we prioritize this? What do we work on first? How certain am I that I'm working on the right things first? Because there's a lot of stuff here. And if I miss the wrong one, I'm wrong once, and that could be the problem, right? And in order to try to answer that, they're dealing with a tremendous amount of manual steps and data silos to try to figure all this out. When we flip back to IT for a moment, well, what are their challenges? Well, they're quite frankly receiving a lot of asks, right? Andrea mentioned earlier, spreadsheets are probably being sent over and saying, hey, go, help me with this and help me patch this problem and resolve these things, with ridiculous expectations on top of that, right? How much time do I have to do it? What are my SLAs? Well, that's really difficult to agree to at the moment, right? And then, of course, the data they have access to or given, it's unreliable, right? How do they know it's even accurate? And are they working from a good foundation of information? And then exponentially, these two business units are trying to deal with their own challenges and then connect with this, what I've highlighted here is a remediation gap. So how do they communicate amongst each other? Well, sending emails and spreadsheets and phone calls and meetings to try to, I'm going to say arm wrestle, to try to figure out, here's our top priorities and here's our biggest risks and here's what we need to be working on first, right? That's leading to, well, inevitably, it's hard to be convinced you're making the right decisions. Are we making poor decisions? These are naturally going to be manual efforts, creating higher costs, right, due to these manual processes. Do we have regulatory exposure because of these things? And really, there's no transparency and a lack of visibility on who's doing what, and are we working on the right things, and how far completed are we, and this and that. So all these things combined, you can see it's not just a technology problem, it's a people, process, and technology problem that we're trying to solve here. It's a sum of its parts. So let's pause here for a moment. Sean, I'm going to kick it over to you, and let's do a poll, and let's see what we're able to find out from this audience, what their challenges are.
Great, Claudius. We're going to share a poll now. We only have 2, but we'd love your feedback, specifically around the biggest challenge you're dealing with in regards to your vulnerability management program. So, the first thing we think about is just pure volume, right? We're just dealing with more, and it's overwhelming, frankly. The second one is, and this is, I think, what Claudius was just talking about, is our ability to prioritize, right? How do we get that done? We have hundreds of thousands of vulnerabilities we need actioned. What's most important? Thirdly, the interaction or the way those 2 business units work together, the IT department and the security department. In some cases, we see that as a challenge. And lastly, it's around really just the inaccuracy of the reports. And even if it's not inaccuracy, it could be lack of visibility, right, for the overall program is an issue. So hopefully you're clicking on the biggest issue there. And we'll give you another minute or 2 to click on the biggest issue. And I know Bridget is patiently waiting. Looks like we've got your votes. And here's our results. Wow, that's pretty impressive how we have a leader, but it's significant across all 4 challenges, it looks like to me. I don't know, Claudius, does that ring true from all the hundreds and hundreds of folks you've talked to?
Yeah, certainly. This kind of echoes that it's not just one problem. There's no one single root cause. It's a sum of its parts. And this kind of echoes what we see. Certainly, the race is pretty close. Maybe in some cases, we've seen some bigger gaps in terms of what's first and second, but this is not surprising to me. Okay, so let's talk about how ServiceNow helps solve these challenges, because that's at the end of the day what we're here to learn as well. Now, when we talk about vulnerabilities come in different shapes and sizes. On the left-hand side here, you can see a couple categories that I'm calling out, right? One could be flaws in your software. These are your network infrastructure, OS type of vulnerabilities. This is where Tenable, Qualys, Rapid7, Tripwire, and other sorts of scanning technologies would go out and discover those types of vulnerabilities. These are flaws in software. There's also flaws in configuration or misconfigurations of assets in your environment, whether it's on-premise or cloud environments. These are vulnerabilities that if I've accidentally not configured something right, maybe left a port open or left the default admin username and password on something, that's a vulnerability that I could be exposed on. So those are flaws in configurations. And then there's also flaws in application development. As I'm, this is your DevOps story, as I'm developing my applications, when we shift left in the security cycle, this is your DevSecOps story, which is, am I creating accidentally vulnerable applications that are going to be running in my environment, right? We want to identify those too. And then another category that you're not seeing is, when I have my penetration testing, exercises done on a cadence or frequency that you would do, those are pen test results that we need to action as well. So there's another category here of vulnerabilities, but all these vulnerabilities are going to be There's a lot of them, and we got to figure out what do we work on first and which ones are most important to my business. For the rest of this, what I call ping pong slide, this visualization that I'm going to walk you through, let's just focus on just the flaws in software. But essentially, we do solve for all of those use cases that I was just sharing. And the first thing we want to do is there's a large volume of vulnerabilities coming at me. I want to prioritize those to make sure we're working on the right things first. So not just how critical is this vulnerability, but it's how critical is it to me, to my organization. So in step number 2, we do what we call risk refactoring. And what this is, it's a sum of many parts as well. You see a little arrow bumping out to a CMDB and then another little arrow that says discovered items. What this simply means is that if we can do a lookup in our asset database that a vulnerabilities come in, what asset is this on? We want to be able to match it because that gives us business context. That allows us to say, well, this is an externally facing asset with PCI information on it. So we got regulatory requirements around this. And critical vulnerabilities need to be resolved in 30 days. Well, we want to know that, right? And we can automatically go assign SLAs and tasks and those sorts of things. Now, I'll mention this because a lot of customers say, well, I don't have a mature CMDB. Does this mean I can't benefit from this? The answer is no. You can absolutely benefit from this. There's no requirement or prerequisite that says thou shall have a mature CMDB to leverage this. This is just one more element. When we talk about risk refactoring, think about it as a series of elements or series of factors that we can score and weight and decide how important this is to our organization. If we don't have that piece of information, no problem. That's just one less factor that we don't factor in. But we also want to look at, is this exploitable, right? We could do external lookups, exploit enrichment. You heard Andrea talk about NVD earlier, right? So we can go look through the National Vulnerability Database, CWE, Common Weakness Enumeration, CVE scoring. And through a series of data that we could gather, we can absolutely now say, this is what's important to our organization. Now comes the additional triaging, and the triaging manually, you're going to be dumping information, chances are, into an Excel spreadsheet and then slicing and dicing that up. We can automate the triaging by automatically grouping vulnerabilities by some sort of commonality. There could be, well, this data center handles these vulnerabilities, or maybe my Windows patching team handles this versus my database or Linux teams handle those. Maybe it's by age of vulnerability or criticality by vulnerability. Any metadata we can then triage by grouping and automatically assigning these vulnerabilities to the right teams. What you're not seeing here is, ServiceNow, we're a highly innovative company. We have machine learning and predictive analytics that allows us to say, here's based on patterns, we're seeing these are the teams that should be receiving these things. So we add exponential value as well by making recommendations with confidence on who should be receiving the work. Then it comes time to take action. And a couple of examples of action could be, well, I need to make a change request. Let's patch this thing. Or I cannot patch, I need an exception request. Or maybe it's a false positive, or maybe there's an emergency patch, or maybe it's even worse and there's a security incident that we need to open up because maybe it's been exploited, right? There's a number of workflows or kickoffs or decisions we want to make, and we support various workflows here. When we consider the exception request, there's an exception deferral process built right into the solution. And essentially, we want to be able to request exceptions and deferrals for a period of time because these are risks to our organization. They should not be perpetual. We need to monitor them. We want to make sure that we approve the exception, maybe wrote the workflow to an executive to approve, and then bring that up for review at a future state. Or coordinating change, right? ServiceNow, we're very fortunate to have a lot of customers, many customers globally speaking, and a lot of customers start with ITSM, for example. We are the platform of choice for IT. And if that's the case, security and IT naturally have a home to work together on the platform. So security can open up change requests to IT, and those actions can start to happen natively on platform to go make those changes, those patches. Then certainly we want to confirm, is the threat resolved? Is that vulnerability gone? Has it been patched? Let's let the machines double check our work. We're human, we make mistakes. So we want to make sure that indeed this vulnerability no longer exists in our environment. And we want the right insight, oversight, transparency, and visibility into this entire program end to end. We want to understand how are we tracking against our KPIs. We want to understand, how are we trending? Are we getting better? Are we getting worse? Is our mean time to resolution improving? Are vulnerabilities going down and decreasing? Are we seeing a pattern? Are there bottlenecks in our processes that we now can start to see to make better business decisions on perhaps where teams need some help? Without the data, you can't really make good business decisions. So the data is everything, right? You want to be able to see what's going on in your environment. With all this understanding, what's that mean to you? Well, this is the sort of outcomes when we talk about what's the business value of how ServiceNow can help, right? So keeping in mind our true North Star, which is we want to protect our company brand, maintain that public confidence and trust, and prevent security related outages. Well, we want to be able to reduce the risk and exposure. We want to create that single system of record and engagement where we can now start to collaborate, efficiently route work to and from each other, right? Let's workflow it. We want to be able to automatically triage and enrich what's most important, understand business impact if we can, and certainly remove those manual siloed swivel chair processes and over reliance on spreadsheets and emails. We want to gain that visibility, that transparency. We want to be able to know with confidence what are our insights, right? Where are our risks, where are critical risks, and what are we doing about them? Now, what that really means to you is these sorts of metrics, right? So when we look at how do we quantify this and what's the ROI to us, well, this is the sort of business value we're referring to, is making sure we're getting better at our assignment, making sure we're closing tickets and vulnerability faster, that we're far more productive, we can handle more volumes and get to maybe not just the critical or maybe not just the highs, and we can go downstream and start to get to those mediums or even low vulnerabilities if that's important to your business. But faster prioritization and response times. Ultimately, it's about reducing that risk and exposure to your organization. And I'll pause here.
Wow.
Yeah.
My head's swimming. It sounds to me, Claudius, it sounds to me like if we've got sort of three stakeholders involved, everybody wins based on what you just said, right? So we've got, when I think about the IT group, I mean, more than anything, they want to know where they should start, what they should be working on, right? What they just want to get stuff done, and they want to get it done in an order that makes sense. And what you just talked about was how the platform helps us prioritize that work.
Absolutely. It's a team sport.
Exactly.
There's a lot involved here, right? And it's not just on one person, one team, and it's a coordinated effort, right? People, process, technology.
Yeah. I also think there's benefit to the folks that have to action this are doing so in a tool set they're familiar with, right? So we're building on top of that familiarity, that adoption. If I think about the stakeholders, the financial stakeholders, the executives in our customer organizations, they certainly love that when they're getting even more value out of an investment they've already made. So I got to think the IT folks are feeling great about knowing what to do and working in a familiar ability to do it. And then I think the third thing that the IT group walks away with, I always think of it sort of as is armor, but what really it is it's setting the right expectation, right, for the remediation, right? Because I think I know from talking to customers, what happens a lot is they'll get these big spreadsheets lobbed over the wall, and then nothing happens. In 3 weeks, somebody starts nagging them about if it's done or not.
Correct. And then on top of that, it's usually like, that's not me. You've sent it to the wrong guy, and you don't realize there's a gap or a delay because there's just lack of communication, and we didn't realize we've sent information to the wrong person, and now we've just lost 3 weeks of time, right?
So from their perspective, they know what to work on. They know they're familiar with the tool set that they do the work in, and they get to say, here's the correct expectation. Don't bother me until that time is expired, which I feel like really sets them up really for a big win.
Correct.
On the other side, on the security side, I think there's a lot of similarities here because of the visibility into the status of what's happening. I mean, we don't have to guess anymore when it was asked or shared with the other business unit. We know exactly kind of the status of it. I think you touched on an interesting item earlier. You were talking about the CMDB, And I noticed when you talked about it and from the security lens, you talked about it as an asset database. And of course, all the IT folks on the call know that it's, we refer to it as a CMDB, but it's the same thing. And because if we're on that common platform, we can more easily share some of those assets between those two departments.
Correct. A single source of truth that we want to make sure both IT and security are working from. And that source of truth should be aligned to our business outcomes, our priorities as an organization. How do we make money and revenue? Well, let's make sure we identify those critical business services or crown jewels. Let's make sure we're prioritizing those things first if there's ever a threat in that line of work, in that stack.
Sure.
Right? So understanding that is important, and it's significant value.
Yeah, I'll say. The other couple more I thought of, one was the kind of the opposite of the expectation piece, right? Like if the expectations are there and everybody has visibility, then they sort of have right-sized that, right? They understand, they've communicated that up into leadership as to when they can work through this volume and how IT is being effective. So again, I think that's like just clarity all around for everybody involved.
Spot on. Absolutely.
Yeah. And the last one, and I know this on both sides of the house can be relevant, but whether we have an after action review or whether we have an audit pending, the tool set that's the suite of tools and the data that we're able to capture in the platform really helps immensely with either that preparation or that reporting after, something's happened. So I feel like there's the secondary benefit, which is we also get to save a lot of manual time prepping for audits.
Absolutely. When you are in real time auditing, logging, and keeping a track of who's doing what, that's available at your fingertips at this point. There's no more retracing your steps to try to figure out who's done what and trying to reproduce the data afterwards.
Yeah, that's great. The last comment I have isn't on the slide, but I mentioned 3 stakeholder groups in my mind. So we've got IT that has all these benefits. We've got the security folks that have all these benefits. The third group, I would argue or suggest, is the executives, right? The financial folks. They can feel good about making an investment in protecting their own data, right? And doing it in a way that in a lot of ways stands on the shoulders of a previous investment, which again, those folks love to hear. So to me, this is just wins all around, Claudius.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Sean, I just wanted to reiterate, that's a very valid point. If you look at the kind of, so cyber risk is really a board level risk or an executive level risk. So if you look at the sort of fines that are now coming out under GDPR and other sort of regulatory, there's CCPA in California, they're massive. They can be up to 4% of your, revenue is what you're looking at for fines. So you don't want a data breach. And so, yeah, and there's actually talk in some, I've heard it in some countries now about possibly prison terms if executives can't show due diligence in protecting customer data. So it's definitely their worry ultimately. Security is charged with fulfilling it, but it's really their concern. So very good point.
Yeah, super. Yeah. Well, I'm glad I'm glad you spoke up there, Andrea, because I want to pick your brain some more. I want to shift gears a little bit out of the vulnerability response and talk more about the security incident response. So from a neophyte point of view, somebody who's just learning about it, it feels like we just talked a lot about managing unstructured work, right? That's a lot of what vulnerability was about. I feel like security incident response is really around governance to a process, operationalizing what happens, but I'm not sure that that's right. Can you kind of give me a sense of what is security and response, and is that kind of the root cause?
Yeah, so it's going to be a similar kind of story that what we said with vulnerability management programs, but it's a little bit different. So it's more of a question of noise. So security incidents are anything from unusual and suspicious activity. So say you've got a vulnerability, well, the bad actors are looking for those vulnerabilities in your infrastructure. They're scanning ports. They're doing all sorts of actions, trying to get into your network, basically. So those are all security incidents. And as you can imagine, there's a typical organization has a SIEM that's kind of almost like, looking at all these different events and trying to prioritize and trying to, group them and make some sense of that data. There's all sorts of other point solutions, as we mentioned before, all generating their own data. So there's a lot of data coming at a typical security team, and their goal is to look, hey, we've got a threat here. We want to eradicate this threat before we actually have a data breach. Worst case, the data breach is also a security incident. When you actually have one, you need to really quickly respond. And there's guidelines and there's regulatory issues around how you need to respond in a structured way to a data breach, for example, under GDPR and all sorts of other HIPAA, all sorts of other kind of regulatory requirements that our customers have. So it's a big area. And I think, again, it's the deduplication of all the noise and knowing what to work on, and knowing when to bring IT in to help support. So really what ServiceNow is going to do, and Claudius is going to talk about it in depth, is they're going to integrate with your SIEM as a first step, and then other threat intelligence feeds and all sorts of data that you can bring in to get that single pane of glass. So we're helping with the swivel chair problem, get the data to the right people at the right time. They're going to be able to look at this highly sensitive data, but at the same time, they're going to be able to bring IT in. So say your port's getting scanned and you want to block it, you need your network team to do it. Well, you can send a task off to your network team to do that work. And you can integrate with change management. And there's all sorts of kind of integration points into IT who needs to help and support the security team. So bringing those together. And right now, problem statement, which we've said before, 197 days to detect a breach in the typical organization. And because of all the things, alert fatigue, swivel chair into different systems, IT and security not working together, lack of focus sometimes on process and people challenges. So Claudius, if you could kind of help dive in a little bit more of how ServiceNow can help solve this problem, that'd be great.
Absolutely. All right. So this is kind of a summary of what you heard Andrea saying here. Essentially, when you look at security operations teams, those handling security incidents, they're trying to focus on removing a threat from your environment, right? But to go to that or go through that process, first of all, we need to be able to detect it. And in most cases, a lot of organizations are swivel chair pivoting from system to system, monitoring various systems. Certainly a SIEM helps consolidate some of that, but it's not going to consolidate everything. There's going to be scenarios where there's going to be probably a couple of connection points and a couple of systems you're going to still need to go ad hoc and monitor for threats. So you're looking through multiple sources and event sources and tools. On top of that, you now need to enrich the incident and understand through analysis, what else can I learn about this? And that means rinse and repeat. We're going to swivel chair pivoting into additional technologies, maybe uploading samples into sandboxes, and we're looking through a bunch of different tools to see what else can we find out about this threat. So we're correlating things manually, and then to try to contain and respond to the actual process, we're likely going to multiple systems here as well, whether it's your Active Directory or your CMDB as an asset database, or various other systems and ticketing platforms you may be using. We're searching multiple records as we're trying to contain this event to ultimately eradicate the threat. So in other words, this kind of summarizes what we're referring to. There's a tremendous amount of delays and manual effort required just in swivel chair activities, right? There's data that must be gathered from multiple sources. There's a lot of process inefficiencies. A lot of folks struggle to know, how do I respond to this threat? If it's a phishing attack versus a malware attack versus a denial of service attack, how confident am I that I'm taking the right steps? If there's no well-defined processes that are repeatable, there's often tribal knowledge used as well. And if that expert has left, does the next person know what to do? That sort of thing, right? So a lot of process inefficiencies or just a lack of response processes. Then there's the reporting, not only to our leadership and our executives, but potentially to external auditors or even our insurers. Right. And to get the right data into a report, we're collecting from a bunch of sources, and then we're trying to reconcile the data and try to make sense of it and get the right information to the right folks. That's oftentimes a daunting task as well. And then on top of all this, we're burning out our analysts, right? So the agent experience is quite poor when they are consistently, alert fatigued with a bunch of noise. And am I working on the right things? Is this another false positive? Is this the right thing? There's a lot of frustration and burnout in that. And security analysts, they're a scarce resource. You want to get the good ones and keep the good ones, right? Because it's just, again, lack of resources, and it's a challenge to just keep hiring more analysts, right? We need a better way. We need automation. We need ways to help solve this problem. So I'll pause here. We're going to do another poll real quick. Sean, back over to you.
Thanks, Claudius. Yeah, the second and last one I'll ask for. It's similar to the vulnerabilities response program, but this one is the biggest challenge you're dealing with around your security incident response program. So that first challenge, that first potential answer is not purely the volume play, although that's a thing for sure, but it's really around the false positives and the noise that you heard Claudius talk about. How do we get to the thing we gotta actually action, right? That's the first option. The second one, again, how to bundle, group, prioritize. The third one really is around the lack of standardized processes that, again, Claudius just spoke about. If tribal knowledge is leaving as the team, changes, and those processes aren't burned into the group, that can cause a lot of wasted time and effort, obviously. And then lastly is really around the inaccuracy piece, even beyond inaccuracy in the reporting, but really visibility into what's happening across the whole program. So there's four items there that we kind of guessed at, or that we hear about over and over again from customers whom we help. I wonder how you would answer it. I'll give you another couple of seconds to click on those buttons. And when Bridget feels like we have enough, she'll share the results. Oh, here we go. Okay, now interesting, Claudius, in this case, we do have a definite leader, which is the standardized response process being lacking.
This makes sense. This is part of what ServiceNow refers to as digital transformation.
Yeah.
The lack of processes certainly also provides an ability to define those processes, but then digitize them. These are your workflows, your playbooks. And if we can not only get that into a digital format, but then automate tasks and assignments, those sorts of things, that starts to help us get aligned. So now we know who's doing what. So this is definitely echoes what I've seen as well.
Great.
Okay. So continuing on, let's see, how does ServiceNow help solve this challenge? This is security incident response. Now, out of the gate, what you're seeing here are these chevrons that are built out at the top. And what this is this is the NIST cybersecurity process flow. This is configurable. Some customers choose the SANS response process flow, or the MITRE ATT&CK process flows, and map it to the cyber kill chain, those sorts of things. Or it could be hybrid. It could be an in-house type of process flow. But all that to say, it's not IT, it's not ITIL. It's cybersecurity processes, taxonomy, language, and what we're doing in cybersecurity is very different than IT in this case, as we're handling security incidents. The first thing we want to do is bring in and centralize all these different event and alert sources. This could be your SIEM, other security tools. This could be manually creating security incidents. This could be forwarding emails, things like phishing emails into ServiceNow, or it could be a lot of security organizations or customers outsourced to security organizations and partners, managed security services partner, MSSP. You're going to start to see some color coding here. You see the first evidence of that in blue, and I'm going to talk about what that is in just a moment. But the other comment I'll make here is there is the context of how I'm showing this is cybersecurity incidents. Certainly common. We're seeing a trend towards what we call the fusion centers or joint SOCs, where it's cybersecurity and non-cybersecurity incidents coming into a single centralized program. We do facilitate other use cases here as well. But for the rest of this ping pong slide, let's refer to cybersecurity incidents. First thing we want to do here after we've centralized, and we've got a centralized spot for collaboration, we want to prioritize what are we working on first. Let's make sure we understand what does this security incident mean to me. Let's filter out the noise. Let's do lookups in our CMD if there's information in there that allows us to apply business context, right? Is there personal identifiable information on this externally facing asset, for example? Double the risk score, work on that first. We want to understand the risk, the business impact, and the priority before we get started. Now here, colored in blue, is we want to look in step number 2 internally, and then in step number 3, we want to look externally. So we want to look at what is the threat intelligence community saying? Has this been seen before? Is this a new URL that they're trying to drive us to, or IP address, or file, or hash? Are these known bads, or is this something we've not seen before? And what are these relationships that maybe some of these threats are linked to each other? We want to automatically enrich the incidents as we're creating them and opening them, and bring that evidence back into the ticket. And by the way, so far, 1, 2, 3, up to 4 here, no humans are involved. This could be fully automated, and we can automatically be creating, enrichment data and gathering this evidence. Now, at step number 4, this is where the poll showed an overwhelming response. This is our determine our response action. These are your playbooks. And if you take off your security hat for just a moment, what is ServiceNow? Well, we are a platform designed to very efficiently work through the enterprise to achieve an outcome, to resolve something. Well, this is exactly what we're doing here. So we want to kick off the right playbook, right? So the way we respond again to phishing, we're going to run our phishing playbook, or our malware, or ransomware, or denial of service, and so on and so forth. There's many out of the box workflows and templates and activity packs that we call on the ServiceNow platform. That's what we're doing here. We're automatically assigning who's doing what, issuing tasks, and getting aligned on our response actions. We see here a little arrow that bumped out, and in many cases, security is not the only team that's responsible for resolving a security threat. We may need help from our friends in IT. We may need to ask them to go patch a server, create a change in the environment. As an example, security can naturally send requests out of the box to IT. If we're the platform of choice for IT, we can do this natively. There's no external connection to do this. And we should be able to ask them for help, but IT or anybody that's not authorized in the security group should not be able to see inside, what is security doing? Why am I being asked to do this? What are you guys up to? What sort of threat is this? Highly sensitive data that's going on in this module. So we want to treat it as such, and only authorized personnel will be able to access these security incidents. Now, back to the color blue, we are also a certified SOAR platform. This simply means we do security orchestration, automation, and response. We've done that for a very long time. An example of that would be a phishing email has come in. We look internally, we look externally. We're running our phishing playbook, and our response says, let's see who else has received this email. Has anybody else in our organization received this threat, this phishing email? Let's automatically search our Exchange Office 365 environment, and let's automatically delete those emails from their inbox before they even know there's a phish. That's just an example of an orchestrated activity that we could take. There's many more. We can quarantine hosts, block firewalls, and so on and so forth. But essentially, we can, as you mature, we can orchestrate and automate some of the remediation for customers. Then it all comes down to the data. There's post-incident reports. What have we done? Who took what steps, what actions, date, timestamp, every information is logged. And then on top of that, we want to be able to see from our dashboards, analytics, and our KPIs, how are we doing overall as a security operations team? Are we getting better or worse? Again, are we getting slower on a response action or faster? Are we seeing a certain type of threat or security event or alert or incident coming at us? Are we being targeted? Are certain assets in our environment targeted? And why is that? Do we have bottlenecks in the process of our response and remediation? Do we need more training, right? There's a lot of information that you're going to be able to determine from the data. Again, the data is everything. The last thing I call out here, and I hinted at this in number 4, and I want to hit it again here, this red rectangular dotted line that built out that says at the bottom, total control and privacy over security data. What this means is this module, security incident response, is a scoped application. It uses its own data tables, its own user roles and permissions, its own administrator, its own knowledge base articles, evidence collection, everything needed to also make sure we're going to pass our audits and our regulatory requirements, because we should not be commingling or sharing data with IT, for example, right? So this you need segregation of duties, separation of duties. It's designed to meet that objective for our customers. So what does all this mean? Well, let's break it down again in terms of the business value of this specific module. There's a lot of words on here, so forgive me for that. But ultimately, what we want to do is give you that centralized spot where you can integrate your security tools and sources into to increase your team collaboration and efficiency, right? We want to automate as much as we can. We want to automatically enrich. We want to reduce that swivel chair activity. We want to apply proper governance, the right workflows. We want to make sure we're following the right response actions, standardize our processes, because once we've standardized that, we can measure ourselves. And then how are we doing from a measurement perspective? Are we getting better or worse? And then, of course, we need that visibility, that transparency into security operations, the dashboards, the reports, that native integration between security and IT, that understanding we're working from the same source of truth, that's your CMDB. And what does that all really mean to you? Well, we want to improve our time to identify, our time to contain. We want to be able to be more efficient by saving hours with automation, which yields dollars, right? We want faster alert processing. We want to be able to get to more things quicker. And we want our security analysts happy and working on the right things instead of the mundane, repeatable tasks, those sorts of things. And I'll pause there. Sean, back to you.
Wow, that was great, Claudius. Thank you. I think where we ended up is in a lot of ways pretty similarly as far as outcomes compared to what we talked about earlier, right? IT has got the benefits of really clear direction, a familiar tool set. They're building on their adoption and investment they've already made in the platform. The security folks obviously have something that they've not had perhaps before, which is that governance around the process and digitization almost, I guess, if to use that word, of the steps, right, that are expected of them. They still get the benefit of being on that common platform and perhaps tapping into IT's asset database. And then lastly, of course, the executives get the benefit of optimizing that prior investment in the platform, but also, and more importantly, protecting and responding in the right manner, frankly, to protect the data.
Yeah, that's spot
really
on.
Super. Another example of everybody wins. I love those.
You got it, Sean.
We're getting towards the top of the hour here, so I'm gonna tee up Andrea to tell you a real world story. But before I do that, I want to say this. We all understand, I think now much better, at least I do, after Andrea and Claudius' explanation of the process and sort of a vision of that castle on the hill, if you will, that top level of maturity. Claudius talked about SOAR and so on. And I bet we all want to get there. But oftentimes, the question is, how do we get started? And that's really where CrossViews comes to play, right? We have worked with Claudius and his team and others within the ServiceNow organization to really create a package service that is that first step, right? If we want to take action, if we want to get rid of manual work, if we want to set the foundation for getting up to that castle on the hill, and we want to return great ROI and really optimize that investment in the other security tools by making them even more accurate and actionable, CrossViews is here to help you. We've got a service pointed right at step one of the vulnerabilities response program and right at step one for the security incident response program. So that's my way of saying, if you don't know how to take this content and action it, reach out to us, right? You've registered, you've got our contact info. We want to talk to you and not only show you what the castle looks like, but what that first step could look like. And with that, Andrea, I'll ask you to wrap us up with a bit of a story about somebody that we actually did that for, and it helped.
Love it. So we have been working with a large financial services company on security incident response, pretty excited actually about what our teams accomplished sort of in a multi-phase project approach. So phase one, we'll talk about first. So we had a customer that was on a legacy ITSM tool. And the organization was moving into ServiceNow for their IT service management. And along with it, they wanted to implement security incident response and have that, what Claudia's talked about, the scoped app, and have all the benefits that they would see from having something built for purpose for an IT team. So phase one was kind of for us to do an integration in with FireEye Helix, bring alerts into ServiceNow, do exactly what we were talking about. We're going to send those alerts first to their level 1 SOC team, which we're actually using Jira. So we integrated with Jira, sent the incidents into their Jira platform. The level 1 SOC would then do that initial triage, just like we talked about, sift through the noise and go, yeah, it's a false positive, guys. And then it would close it in Jira and ServiceNow, or no, it's not a false positive. Let's classify the incident appropriately. And once they did that, it would then come back into ServiceNow, classified, and it would kick off one of 7 playbooks. Examples would be malware, ransomware, web host attack, third-party breach, etc., aligned to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And then the customer would then get that incident back and start working the incident. We also managed to get a integration with Wombat to bring in phishing emails. And then lastly of interest, we got rid of their legacy pager duty solution and actually used ServiceNow's on-call database and notify functionality to actually notify on a critical SEV1 incident. Phase 1. Phase 2 for the same customers, then we're going to look at bringing in their threat intelligence. They have a bunch of different feeds that they're looking at, and we're also going to be working on their orchestration. So we're going to orchestrate malware, we're going to orchestrate phishing attacks and so forth, so helping them soar. So that's kind of where we're currently on that project right now. So the first one, 3 months, time to value, large enterprise, and then phase 2 is getting that single pane of glass and getting the orchestration. So hope that helps.
It really does, because I think it speaks to that crawl, get value, optimize your investment, and then walk, and then ultimately run, and let's start leveraging some of that automation to really double down. I feel like we're starting to get into the innovation part at that point, really.
That's right. Yep.
How do we get a competitive advantage even over some of our competitors and whatnot?
And get our, like the last Claudia's point, our SOC analysts, we don't want them doing administrative tasks.
Yeah,
we want them
exactly.
We want them threat hunting. That's really the value proposition here. Yeah.
Well, that's great. So let me thank my co-presenters. Claudius, we certainly couldn't have done it without your subject matter expertise. So thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Sean.
Andrea, you make me look smarter every day we work together. So thank you, and I appreciate you. To our audience, thank you for joining us. We're here to help. We're also here to take sort of a nebulous journey and break it down very, specifically. We'll jointly, we'll eat that elephant one spoonful at a time. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.